This is an augmented chord, and you probably learned it at some point in your piano journey, but you might be scratching your head thinking, why did I need to learn this chord? And furthermore, how do I use augmented chords in my playing to make my playing sound more interesting? Well, believe it or not, augmented chords are some of the most important chords that pro musicians use to create amazing solos, add passing chords, and create some really rich, beautiful sounding chords. So in today's lesson, I'm going to show you 3 amazing augmented chord techniques that will help you take your playing to the next level. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, first we're going to do a quick review on augmented chords. If you already know your augmented chords, then you can skip ahead in this video to learn the 3 techniques. Okay, the simplest definition of an augmented chord is when you start with a major chord and you raise the 5th. But an even easier trick to figuring out an augmented chord is to play 2 sets of major third intervals. So if I start on C, if I go up 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps, it's a major third, and then 4 half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 2 sets of major thirds. Now you'll see 3 common chord symbols for augmented chords: C+, C aug, or C sharp 5. And you can build an augmented chord on any one of the 12 notes at the piano. So we have C augmented, D flat augmented, D augmented, E flat, E, F, G flat, G, A flat, A, B flat, and B. However, augmented chords are perfectly symmetrical, meaning that all of the intervals are a major third apart. So each augmented chord shares the same notes with 2 other augmented chords. In the case of C augmented, it shares the same notes as E augmented and A flat augmented. For D flat augmented, it shares the same notes as F augmented and A augmented. For D augmented, it shares the same notes with F sharp augmented and B flat augmented. Finally, E flat augmented shares the same notes with G augmented and B augmented. So there are 4 families of augmented chords. Each family has 3 augmented chords for a total of 12 chords. Another way of thinking of this is that there are only 4 unique augmented chords. So if I start on C augmented and then I go up to D flat, D, E flat, if I go up another half step, I'm playing the same exact notes as the C augmented chord. Now you might be thinking, Johnny, this sounds great, but how do I actually use augmented chords in my playing to make it sound more interesting? Well, that's the next step. I'm going to show you 3 amazing techniques that will take your playing to the next level. But before we do that, if you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe for more videos just like this. All right, technique 1 is a very simple technique. You can use it regardless of your playing level. And I call this the elongated major chord technique. And sometimes you have a tune where you're playing a major chord for a long period of time, like the tune In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning. Notice how I'm sitting on this C chord for a long time. Well, what many pro musicians would do in this case is add the augmented chord as a passing chord. So what I'm doing is I'm starting on my C chord, but instead of staying here, I'm going up to like a C augmented, and it creates a nice little inner voice movement. Da, da. You hear that middle note, kind of like a cello line? And then I like to go to the A sometimes, like a C6, and then back to my C augmented. And you can use this technique on so many tunes where you're just playing a major chord for a long time, like Heart and Soul. Okay, let's do the augmented chords. Okay, so much more interesting. What tunes can you think of where you can use this technique? Well, let me know in the comments. By the way, if you want to learn more about passing chords and the various techniques that I love to use in my chord progressions, check out our course, Passing Chords and Reharmonization. We have courses for beginner to intermediate level and intermediate to advanced level, so I'll put a link to those below. All right, technique 2 is an amazing technique that you can use if you want to solo at the piano and you want to create a really cool sound. Check out what this technique sounds like. All right, so what the heck am I playing? Well, if you want to use this technique, you first need to understand the idea of triad pairs. And if you take your C augmented chord, there is another augmented chord that pairs really well with this chord, and that is a D augmented. Okay? And these are called triad pairs because they're often used together when you're improvising over a chord progression. So if you want to use this technique, the first thing that I recommend is that you practice these triad pairs up the piano. So we play C augmented, D augmented, and then we're going to play the C augmented with the E in the bass. You see that? And then we're going to play the D augmented with the F sharp in the bass, and then the C augmented with the G sharp in the bass, and finally the D augmented with the A sharp in the bass. Once you've practiced this technique, then you can use these chords to solo over some common chord progressions. For example, let's say you're in the key of F major and you're on a 5 chord, which is a C7. Well, guess what? You can use each of these triad pairs to create a really cool solo over your C7 chord. Here's a quick example. So why does this sound good? Well, look at our first triad pair. We have E, G sharp, and C. Well, these notes are part of a C7 chord, and this G sharp is called the flat 13 or the sharp 5. Then when we go to our second triad pair, we also have some cool notes that work with the C7. We have the 7th, we have the 9th, which is a chord extension, and then the flat 5. Now from here, I go to my C augmented chord, my D augmented chord, and then I end on an F chord like this. The last thing you want to do is you want to arpeggiate these notes. Now you might be thinking, Johnny, this sounds cool, but how do I use this on other chords? And the trick to figuring out these triad pairs is to start on the root of your dominant 7 chord, that's the C, and play an augmented chord. So this is your first chord of your triad pair, and then for the second chord, just go up a whole step to D and play an augmented chord. So here are the 2 triad pairs for C. So let's say you wanted to play this in the key of maybe D major. Well, let's say you're on the 5 chord, that's an A7. How do you figure out your triad pairs? Well, it's an A augmented, and then go up a whole step and play B augmented. Now, if you want to learn more about how to use triad pairs in your soloing, check out our full-length course on this topic, Scales for Improv on 7th Chords. In this course, I show you all of the triad pairs that you'll want to use for the most common scales that you would solo with at the piano. So I'll put a link to that below. All right, technique number 3 is a little more advanced technique called upper structures. And it's a way that you can use augmented chords to take ordinary chord progressions and make them sound amazing. For example, I'm going to take an ordinary C augmented and I'm going to use it in a way that you probably wouldn't think to use it, but it'll sound awesome on this progression. So what did I just do? Well, I took a C augmented triad and I put it over an A flat 7 chord. And what this did is it turned our A flat 7 chord into a much more interesting chord called an A flat 7 with a flat 13. And so this is what an upper structure triad is. It's basically a triad that you can play in the right hand over a completely different root in your left hand, and you can get some really nice colors. In the case of this upper structure triad, it's an augmented triad built on the 3rd of a dominant 7 chord. Now for this upper structure, since it's used on a dominant 7 chord, you would probably use this in the key of D flat major. So for this particular progression, I went A flat, little melody, and I resolve it to a D flat 6-9 chord. By the way, something really cool is that you can use the same upper structure on a C7 chord, and you can also use it on an E7 chord. In other words, with the same upper structure, you have a C7 with a flat 13, and you also have an E7 with a flat 13. All right, there are 4 more upper structure techniques that you can use with this C augmented. The second technique is where you play the C augmented over a D7 chord. And so this turns your D7 into a much more interesting chord called a D9 with a sharp 11. And here's how you can use this in a chord progression. In this case, I'm going from a D7 chord to a G major 7 chord, and I'm using that upper structure up here. This is an inversion of that C augmented chord, and then I'm playing a little melody, and I'm resolving to a G major chord. All right, the third upper structure technique sounds like this. Okay, this is a C augmented chord over a G flat, or a G flat 7. And so what this does is it turns a G flat 7 into a much more interesting chord called a G flat 9 with a sharp 11. And here's how you can use this in a chord progression. I'm basically playing an F sharp 7 chord with the upper structure, little melody, and I'm resolving it to a B major 7. By the way, I wanted to mention that the lesson sheet music you're seeing up here on the top left of your screen is downloadable and printable. You can also change the key of this entire lesson with the click of one button with our smart sheet music, so I'll put a link to all of that below. All right, upper structure technique number 4 is when we play our C augmented chord over an A. And this turns it into a really cool chord called an A minor major 7. It has a really cool sound to it. And so you can use this in progressions where you have a little walk down in the top of the chord. Okay, A minor major 7, there's the C augmented, and then you end on an A minor 6. All right, upper structure technique number 5 is when you play a C augmented chord over a B flat 7, and it creates a really cool B flat 7 chord. This is actually called a B flat 9 with a sharp 11. And here's how you can use it in a chord progression. Okay, I'm basically going from a B flat 7, little melody, to an E flat major 7. By the way, if you want to learn more about upper structure triads, the best ones to use on your chords, exercises to master them, then check out our full-length course, Coloring Dominant Chords with Upper Structures. I'll put a link to that below. Hey, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the lesson, please let me know in the comments. Also, be sure to check out pianowithjonny.com. We have over 1,000 step-by-step lessons for all playing levels where you'll learn your favorite songs, styles, and how to improvise at the piano. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.